My name is Gero Decker, founder and CEO of Signavio, and I'm also going to talk about business decision management. Before I do that, a couple of words about us, Signavio as a company. So far we've been a pure play BPM vendor. We're about 65 people big at the moment. And we only focus on product development. So we're not doing any consulting ourselves. This is where we work with a lot of partners. We're headquartered out of Berlin, Germany, but also have offices here in California and Singapore. One thing we're very proud of, we're actually officially the 5th fastest growing company of Germany, so I think that's a good thing. So far we've focused on collaborative process design, so helping people talk to each other in a structured way about where to improve, where to innovate in a business. So really targeting a business audience. Also where part of our growth comes from is that we're heavily involved in the SAP ecosystem, helping implementation and upgrade projects with a process-oriented view. But what I'm talking about today is not that stuff, but it's basically the 50% some of our customers were missing. So they said they're big fans of Signavio, but said, you know, with your tool and with the process-oriented approach, we can only cover 50% of our questions. So of course, I was asking myself, what's the other 50%? And it was about how we make decisions within those processes. So they asked us, do you have something? We said, no. Do you know rules? No, not really. Are you planning to do anything? Well, there's not a standard. But this has changed last year with the beta of DMN in February. And the approval in December, we finally jumped on it and are now all in for decision modeling and decision management. Just to give you a short tutorial, like the 10-minute version, if you want a long version, go talk to Bruce. DMN talks about decisions and sub-decisions, dependencies between them. It talks about inputs, so those things that go into decisions. And it talks about so-called knowledge sources, things that govern decisions, like regulatory requirements or internal policies that you have to take into account when designing the decision. A decision always centers around a question and the potential answers you can come up with for that question. It focuses on things like decision owners and so on. These are all things that are not graphically shown in DMN, but rather come through attributes. The second level of DMN is decision logic. So much like we've also seen in the Sapiens presentation before, DMN uses or suggests decision tables. You see input columns for the things that drive your decision, and you got outputs. And then the rules are the rows in there, basically saying for which combination of inputs do I provide which output. Of course, when you come up with decision logic, there are certain quality questions or verification questions, like are rules contradicting, for example? Is my rule set complete? Have I covered everything? So this is what a tool should definitely answer. The question of executability. Much like Sapiens, we don't do the execution portion. We generate stuff that can be readily executed by business rules management systems out there. So there are certain steps to be taken to get there. And of course, the big question of governance or lifecycle management for decisions. Because if you're heavily compliance, if you're heavily regulated, you can't just change things and then redeploy it. So in about 2 weeks' time, we're actually going to have our official product launch of the Signavio Decision Manager, which is our second product. Which addresses, first of all, process analysts, subject matter experts to get started with, thinking about the process, fleshing out the first requirements for decisions, getting data people involved to know what data is actually available to make decision on. Sometimes there are different people who do the actual logic, IT experts who want to execute. And then the executable stuff goes to either centralized decision services, to BPMS systems, or to custom software. So what I'm going to show you in this demo that will follow in a couple of seconds is, first of all, the step from process to decision requirements. So starting with the process and then going into details with the decisions. The second is about defining decision logic. and then doing the verification. So this completeness or contradiction check, for example. And then the third thing is just to show you a brief introduction about test case generation. So going into the area of executability and actual executable code. I'll do that with the example of Drools. So our friends at Red Hat have a wonderful product there that can then execute that stuff. That's it for the presentation, and ready to switch to my monitor. So, as promised, I'll give you a little bit more of an introduction of how DMN works, now based on the tool. Probably many of you have seen this tool. You can do all kinds of things. What most people do with Signavio is mapping out processes on different levels. We had a presentation earlier today also about the higher levels, above the bpmN level. So we have a lot of use cases or people using that heavily in Signavio, of course, as well. But what people spend most of their time on in Signavio is talking about processes, designing them, looking at how they currently work, how they should work, how a new or changed business model would reflect on the operational dimension. So this is what I'm going to take as a starting point, this customer service process with 2 levels of support that handle a request and hopefully provide a solution to the customer. What I want to introduce right now is a thing here in between, because we figured that our customer support is overloaded with all kinds of requests. Our service levels are getting down. And actually, we found out that 50% of the requests that came in are actually not covered by support contracts. So if we had declined them, or even better, offered an offer for support subscriptions, that would have improved our business. So this is what we want to do. So we're introducing here. So we're not doing the cross-selling bit as of now. Eligibility, a check that we do before, and depending on whether this check is successful or not, I will actually work on the case or send a nice response to the customer saying basically, well, your thing is declined. So we'll work like this, and you send a decline message or so. Right? And then, are you eligible? If not, it will go down the upper path. If yes, it will go there. Okay. All right. So this is the bpmN portion. We all know that. bpmN already has actually something called a business rule task, where it was already foreseen to add something like DMN later on to be able to provide the details of how the decision making actually happens within that process. So you see that with this small icon. Actually, back in the days, they chose to have a decision table. I think that was pretty wise. And now what you can do in Signavio, or the grayscale doesn't come through that well, but either you could specify a decision table directly if it's a rather simple decision, or if it's more complex, then what you would do is you create a DMN diagram to specify the details. Okay, so let's see how internet connection to the German server works. There we are. So we see that we have a correspondence between a top-level decision in DMN with the bpmN task. And now we can start refining that. So you could say, my eligibility is actually based on customer status. It's based on, what else? Do I have an active support contract? And maybe the request type. Request type. And now we can go ahead and start building out the decision logic. With decision logic, of course, the important part is the data structure behind it. We have business users, so we won't talk about Java classes or complicated structures here, but they have to do certain things. So for example, they would say, customer status is an enumeration, and I have VIP and standard. And active support contract is a Boolean, so true false type thing. Request type is, again, make it easy, critical, non-critical. And the output is, eligible or not eligible. Okay, and then you can start crafting your logic. So you can say, if it's a VIP customer, he will always get the support, for example, no matter whether he has an active support contract or not. He's in the important bucket. If I have a standard customer, I might want to say, only if I have an active support contract and the request type is critical, then I'm eligible, right? So this is what business people could come up with. So what you can then do is to hit the verify button, and it will tell you whether rules overlap or whether rules are complete or incomplete. So in this particular case, there are two things that you haven't covered. So basically the case that you have a standard status and you don't have an active support contract, and for the case where you have a standard contract which is active, your standard active contract and non-critical request. So you can add those. Well, I was hoping to get this button by today to get the automatic refactoring. It didn't happen, so we have to do it manually for now. Okay. All right, and the other thing, which was this case and non-critical. I forgot this one here. Okay, now it's complete. Okay, so this is good and nice, but now we figured that the customer status is actually a little bit more complicated to gather. So this is not something we have readily available in our systems, but this is yet another decision that we have to make based on further inputs down the line. So what you do, you refactor this to become a sub-decision, and which is based on the revenue and the location maybe. So same story here. You say location is, let's say, US or EU, and revenue is a number. And then you go ahead and say, actually, again, if US, then I'm a VIP customer. If I'm in the EU and my revenue is lower than 500, then I'm a standard customer. EU and greater than 400, I'm a VIP. Okay, so obvious case here, there are two rules that overlap. So if I'm EU location and I'm between 400 and 500, obviously I have two rules that apply, so I'll better fix that. This checking is actually quite interesting, depending on how stable your data model is. So in some cases, like here, VIP versus standard customer, that's pretty stable. But we have a lot of scenarios where we actually pull the values from the live operational systems on the fly. And they might change in the transactional systems any minute. So this is a real challenge to, on the one hand, provide verification at that point of that snapshot, but also, of course, to cater for situations where you have additional values, for example, at runtime that you haven't foreseen. So these are some of the intricacies that you run into when solving some of the more complex scenarios out there. Okay, so let's save that. So this is all good and nice. The final thing I want to show here on this DMN is the going towards executability. So depending on the target platform, of course, you have different requirements that you have to fulfill. Certain things that are supported, other things that are not supported. DMN is pretty mighty and pretty extensible. So for example, it not only covers the rules portion, but it also covers things like predictive analytics. So you might have complex neural network or some scoring algorithm, for example, that drives a decision, right? Not only the rules. So far, we only have native support for the rules portion, but those other things will come over time, attaching ourselves also to those analytics types tools, so that you can, for example, if you defined your neural network somewhere else and tried it out somewhere else, that you pull it in so that you at least can refer to it and make sure that structurally from its inputs and outputs, for example, matches the overall decision-making structure. Okay, so what happens if I export it to Joules? Michael mentioned it before. Joules, like many rule systems, have a flat view of the world in terms of rules. So this is Joules code. And there are just rules one after the other. So the dependency or this hierarchical relationship that we've seen in DMN is, is put into code, and only through the runtime behavior of those Joules rules it would lead to the same behavior as modeled. What you see here is that this is not fully bound to the technical environment. So you have those declare areas up there in Joules. So in Signavio, you would in most scenarios stick to those, let's say, business-facing data objects. And then Joules has mapping files of taking those business-oriented objects to actual Java classes and interfaces. So you would do that as the second step to map that out, right? So this happens outside of Signavio for most cases. For some cases, we do see that people want to specify the Java stuff already in Signavio. But in other cases, for example, if you have this custom software development piece, for example, you might have a customer object in 5 different implementation styles, depending on which area you exactly inject it to, but with the same logic. Then you do this way and then have 3 different mapping files, depending on where you actually use it. OK, so this was that. And just to briefly show you, this is still looks very rough. It's an early product, not even released yet. So bear with me. But this would, for example, be a thing where the system generates a list of test cases for you, so that either for regression testing or for making sure that Signavio actually produced the right things that you expect it to be, you get an output. Sometimes you have interesting findings. For example, here, this is the revenue column, and the test cases for C-100 for the revenue. So this might also give you, in some cases, hints for where you might want to constrain things or have need further specification actually in the decision model. OK, so this is it for the decision modeling capabilities. Of course, this very nicely ties into, oops. Now this is, right, it's gone. Of course, this ties into all the mechanisms you might know of Signavio. For example, there is also a centralized glossary or dictionary, as we call it, in Signavio. So if you have, for example, customer status already defined, you can reuse that, like here, gold, silver, bronze, so that you can, so the notion of reuse of data definitions, but also decisions, is, of course, of huge importance when talking about decisions. OK. Other things this nicely ties into is, of course, there is a presentation option or presentation layer for end users in the breadth of the organization. So where you can then drill down, all the way. I think I didn't save it. I should save it. Otherwise, it won't show. OK. So where you can drill down, where you can search, where you can, have a preview of detached documents. Some configurations in German, bear with me. But here, for example, for the process, you have, it pulls together all the information, similar, like in the case of Denis, with the systems involved and roles involved and KPIs involved and stuff like that, where you can drill down. I'm, for example, first level support. What's my stuff? And here's handle requests with further information and so on. Maybe even a link to the corresponding SAP or whatever enterprise system to jump to. And then you can dive down into the decision-making logic here of check eligibility. Again, the same thing. I didn't save that one. So that people can read, find all the relevant information.